The universe was a vast and ancient place, brimming with countless civilizations and the echoes of long-dead species. Humanity, once a small, inconsequential species on a backwater planet, had slowly clawed its way through the stars. But despite their achievements, they had never truly earned their place among the galactic powers. That was about to change. The Terran Confederation, a coalition of human colonies spread across several star systems, had long been a thorn in the side of the powerful, ancient races that ruled the galaxy with their advanced technology and unfathomable lifespans. Humanity had always been underestimated. The other species saw humans as primitive, their technology crude and unrefined, their culture disorganized. But the Terrans had something none of them possessed, a relentless drive to survive, to conquer, and to fight for their place in the cosmos. It was on the desert world of Pirion 3 that the first spark of rebellion was ignited. The planet, rich in precious minerals, had been a key resource for the Dominion of Nrath, a hyper-advanced reptilian empire that controlled the region. The Nrath had enslaved the human settlers on Pirion 3, using them as forced labor to extract the planet's wealth, all while treating them with utter disdain. For years, the Terran settlers had endured the oppression. But they were not a people to bend or break. The Dominion's rule had pushed them to the brink, and in the shadows of their mining camps, a movement began to grow. It started as whispers, a group of disgruntled workers, some former soldiers, and a few idealistic leaders. They spoke of defiance, of freedom, and, most importantly, of revenge. These whispers would soon turn into something far more dangerous, an uprising. Captain Alara Voss, a seasoned Terran military leader, stood at the head of this movement. Her time in the military had taught her many things, most notably that the only way to survive in the galaxy was to strike first, strike hard, and never show weakness. With her crew of soldiers, engineers, and strategists, she had prepared for the day when the Terrans would no longer stand idly by. The first assault came swiftly. Under the cover of night, a small, yet highly trained team of rebels infiltrated an Nrath weapons depot, seizing control of their first cache of advanced technology. For the first time, the Terrans had access to the weapons and tools that could level the playing field. They immediately struck back at their oppressors, using guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and surprise attacks to undermine the Nrath's dominance on Pirion 3. But this was only the beginning. The Dominion of Nrath, though mighty, had made a critical mistake in underestimating humanity. As word of the uprising spread, more and more Terrans joined the cause, swelling the ranks of the rebel forces. What had started as a small, isolated insurrection had now become a full-scale rebellion. The Nrath, caught off guard by the ferocity of the Terran response, quickly realized they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The Nrath leadership, with their centuries of experience, had grown complacent, and they viewed the Terrans as little more than a nuisance. But as the days turned to weeks, and the rebels continued to gain ground, the Nrath began to realize the gravity of the situation. This was no mere skirmish, it was the dawn of a new era. In the midst of this conflict, Captain Voss made a bold decision. She realized that if the rebellion was to have any hope of succeeding, they needed to send a message to the galaxy at large. The Terrans needed to show the other species that humanity was not to be underestimated, that they were ready to take their place among the stars, no longer as a subjugated people, but as a force to be reckoned with. To do this, Voss launched a daring assault on the heart of the Dominion's power, a heavily fortified space station orbiting Pirion 3. If the Terrans could cripple the Nrath's military command and send a clear signal of defiance, it could change the course of the entire war. It was a suicide mission, but Voss was willing to risk everything for her people's freedom. The battle for the space station was brutal. Waves of Nrath warships swarmed the Terran assault fleet, but the Terrans fought with a tenacity and determination that none of the Nrath could comprehend. They knew that their survival depended on this victory. In the chaos of the battle, Voss herself led a boarding party to infiltrate the station's central command hub. With weapons drawn and her mind focused solely on the mission, she carved her way through the corridors, cutting down any Nrath soldier who dared to stand in her path. As the Terrans breached the heart of the station, the Nrath command was thrown into disarray. Captain Voss, with a flick of a switch, detonated the core of the station, sending a shockwave through the system. The Nrath would no longer have control over Pirion 3. The rebellion had won its first major victory, and the galaxy was watching. The explosion that rocked the Nrath space station was felt across the galaxy. Pirion 3, once a resource-rich world under tight Dominion control, was now the epicenter of a growing human rebellion. The Nrath, stunned by the scale of the Terran resistance, scrambled to regroup, but the damage had already been done. Captain Alara Voss's victory, broadcasted across galactic communications, sent shockwaves through the political landscapes of multiple star systems. For years, humanity had been nothing more than a marginal player in the grand tapestry of galactic politics. But now, for the first time, they had forced the Nrath, a powerful empire with centuries of dominance, onto the defensive. The rebellion on Pirion 3 had sparked a fire within the human colonies, igniting a collective sense of purpose. It was no longer just about surviving, it was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. The leaders of the Confederation, a coalition of Terran factions, quickly took notice. Terran colonies, many of which had been subjugated or ignored by the greater galactic powers, began to rally behind Voss and the rebellion. The Confederation, while still fragmented and struggling with internal power struggles, realized this was an opportunity they could not afford to squander. Humanity was at a crossroads. They could either remain isolated, scattered across the stars, or they could unite and fight for a greater purpose. Voss knew that the rebellion's success would depend on rallying not just the oppressed, but also those with the resources, technology, and military power to tip the scales in humanity's favor. As word of the victory spread, the Terran people rallied behind the cause. But it wasn't just humanity that took notice. The galactic powers, long dismissive of the human race, now had to reconsider their stance. Would they crush this nascent rebellion, or would they seek to control it for their own ends? The first to respond were the Scythar, an ancient insectoid race known for their brutal tactics and mastery over psychic warfare. They had long been adversaries of the Nrath and saw the Terran rebellion as a potential opportunity to weaken their rivals. The Scythar sent a delegation, not to offer assistance, but to threaten. They demanded that the Terrans cease their rebellion and accept Scythar protection in exchange for allegiance. Captain Voss, however, was no fool. She had learned the hard way that diplomacy could only take one so far in the galaxy. She knew that the Scythar saw humans as a tool to be used, and once the rebellion was crushed, they would move in and subjugate humanity, just as the Nrath had done. Voss rejected their offer, choosing instead to continue the fight on her own terms. The refusal to bow to the Scythar was met with swift retribution. Within days, a fleet of Scythar warships descended upon Pirion 3, intending to crush the Terran resistance and bring the rebellious planet to heel. But Voss was prepared. She had anticipated the Scythar's move and had already begun to form alliances with the other human colonies, gathering resources and forces for the coming conflict. The battle for Pirion 3 became a pivotal moment in the rebellion. The Terrans, now armed with advanced weapons and technologies taken from the Nrath and Scythar, fought with a ferocity born from desperation and necessity. Every inch of the planet's surface became a battleground, and the Terrans held their ground. But the Scythar were formidable opponents, using their psychic abilities to control the battlefield in ways the Terrans could not anticipate. The psychic warriors of the Scythar unleashed devastating waves of mental energy, attempting to break the human will. But even as their forces wavered, the Terrans remained unyielding, their determination fueled by the knowledge that their future, their very survival, depended on this fight. As the Terran forces began to push back the Scythar invaders, something remarkable happened. The people of Pirion 3, once oppressed and subjugated, rose up in full rebellion. The Terrans had not only gained the loyalty of their fellow colonists, but they had inspired an entire population to join the fight. The revolt spread like wildfire across the galaxy as other human colonies saw the example set by Pirion 3. The Scythar, realizing the magnitude of the uprising, made a strategic withdrawal. The rebellion had dealt them a significant blow, and they retreated to lick their wounds. But the Terrans knew this was not the end. The Scythar, like the Nrath before them, would be back. And when they did, humanity would be ready. In the aftermath of the battle, Captain Voss stood on the steps of the Terran Command Center, gazing at the burning horizon of Pyrrhion 3. The skies were now filled with the remnants of the Scythar fleet as they fled, their retreat a sign of humanity's resilience. But the war was far from over. Voss knew the next phase of the rebellion would be even harder. The galactic powers would not stand idly by as a new player rose to challenge their dominance. The Nrath, humiliated by their defeat, would return with even greater force, and other empires would not hesitate to take advantage of the situation. But one thing had become clear: humanity's time had come. The day the Terrans claimed Pyrrhion 3 was not just a victory for the rebellion, it was the beginning of humanity's ascent to the stars. And it would not stop until the whole galaxy knew the name of the Terran Confederation. The day of reckoning had arrived. The victory on Pyrrhion 3 had done what many thought impossible: it had united the fractured human colonies under a single banner. Captain Alara Voss and the rebels had struck a blow that would reverberate across the galaxy for years to come. But in the wake of their triumph, they faced a reality far more perilous than they had anticipated. The galactic powers, long dismissive of humanity's potential, were now watching closely, and they were far from pleased. In the heart of the galaxy, the dominion of Nrath was seething. Their pride, once a cornerstone of their empire, had been shattered. The destruction of their military command station at Pyrrhion 3 was not just a military defeat, it was a humiliation. But the Nrath were not the type to let insults go unanswered. Their leadership was now in disarray, and internal power struggles threatened to fracture their empire. Yet, despite their turmoil, the Nrath would not allow a human-led rebellion to continue unchecked. The Nrath High Council, once confident in their control over the galaxy, immediately ordered the construction of an unprecedented war fleet, designed specifically to deal with the Terran threat. The fleet was to be massive, with enough firepower to annihilate entire colonies. They knew the Terrans were resourceful, but they also knew they had no real hope of winning a prolonged war. The Dominion's new fleet would not just crush the Terran rebellion, it would send a message to all species that defying the Nrath would never be tolerated. At the same time, the galactic superpowers, the Scythar, the Harvax Coalition, and the Zenthri combined, began to reconsider their stance toward humanity. None of them were willing to stand idly by as the Terran Confederation grew stronger. The Scythar had already tasted defeat at the hands of the Terrans on Pyrrhion 3, and they would not be content to simply watch as the humans claimed their place in the galaxy. The Harvax Coalition, a vast alliance of technologically advanced species, saw the Terrans as a potential ally, but only if they could be controlled and manipulated. The Zenthri combine, an enigmatic race known for their ruthless diplomacy and covert operations, began to plot behind the scenes, seeking ways to undermine humanity's unity. It was in this tense atmosphere that Captain Voss began to make her preparations for the next phase of the rebellion. The Terran Confederation had, for the first time, been able to unite its fractured factions, and they now needed to act quickly to secure more resources, technology, and allies. Voss knew that the fight ahead would require more than just courage, it would require alliances with those who shared humanity's goals, even if they did not always share their methods. But who could they trust? The galaxy was a treacherous place, and humanity had few friends. The Nrath and their allies would soon come for them, and it would be only a matter of time before the Terrans would have to face an all-out war on multiple fronts. In a bold move, Voss reached out to the Corians, an ancient race of nomadic traders known for their vast knowledge of the galaxy's secret routes and hidden resources. Though the Corians were known for their mercantile nature, they had no love for the Nrath and their imperial ambitions. They had a long history of striking deals with smaller species, and while their motivations were often murky, Voss knew that an alliance with the Corians could provide the Terran rebellion with crucial intelligence and logistics. Her envoy, led by Captain Marcus Talon, was dispatched to the Corian homeworld, a planet that existed outside the bounds of any major galactic power. The planet, known as Velozal, was a place of intrigue and shadow. The Corians had no central government, no real military, and no loyalty to any one species. Their loyalty was to the highest bidder, or to those who could offer something of value. Meanwhile, back on Pirion 3, the Terran forces began fortifying their position. Voss had already made the decision to transform the world into the Confederation's new capital. It was no longer just a symbol of rebellion, it was a rallying point for every Terran across the stars. The planet's vast deserts and resource-rich landscape made it an ideal base of operations, but the Nrath would not allow such an important world to remain in human hands for long. The rebellion had grown beyond the control of a single commander, and as Voss continued to strategize for the coming war, she knew she could not do it alone. She needed help, not just from the Corians, but from the other factions within humanity's fractured colonies. It was time for the Confederation to expand, to take on the mantle of a true galactic power, or risk being crushed under the weight of their enemies. The stage was set for the greatest conflict humanity had ever faced. The first battles of the war were over, but the real struggle was only just beginning. The Terrans would have to prove they were worthy of their place in the stars, or be wiped out by the very powers that once looked down upon them. As Captain Voss stared at the stars from the bridge of her flagship, she knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. Humanity had made its first step into the galactic stage. Now, the only question that remained was whether they could hold their ground. The rebellion had ignited a fire in the hearts of humanity, but the galaxy was not ready to let go of its comfortable hierarchy. With the defeat of the Scythar and the growing influence of the Terran Confederation, the ancient empires of the galaxy were forced to take action. They could not allow a species like humanity, unpolished, unpredictable, and raw, to rise so quickly. The Nrath were the first to strike back, but they were not the only ones who had begun to move. The Terran Confederation's victory on Pirion 3 had been a beacon to both allies and enemies alike. In the months following the battle, the rebellion had strengthened, expanding into new territories and winning several key skirmishes against the Nrath's scattered forces. However, for every victory, new challenges arose. The Confederation was still a loose coalition, plagued by infighting between the various human factions, each with its own priorities and agendas. Voss, despite her tactical genius, found herself often caught between these factions, attempting to hold the Confederation together while keeping an eye on the impending galactic storm. The Nrath, humiliated and desperate, had not sat idle. Their newly formed war fleet, an intimidating armada of thousands of ships, had emerged from the heart of their empire, ready to crush the rebellion once and for all. Their fleet's firepower was overwhelming, their military strategies refined over centuries of warfare. They had one goal in mind: reclaim Pirion 3 and restore their dominance over the human colonies. It wasn't just the Nrath who were gearing up for war. The Scythar, eager for revenge after their defeat, had regrouped and begun to rally their own fleets. Though their psychic warfare had been repelled during the battle for Pirion 3, they had learned from their mistakes. Now, they were working on new weapons, psychic amplifiers designed to break the Terran will and leave their armies vulnerable to manipulation. The Zenthri combine, ever calculating and ruthless, watched the growing conflict with keen interest. Though they had not yet taken sides, their covert operatives were already at work, planting misinformation and destabilizing the alliances between the human colonies. The Zenthri were masters of subterfuge, and they saw an opportunity to undermine the Terrans from within while waiting for the right moment to make their move. In the midst of this growing storm, Voss knew the Confederation could not stand alone. She had to find a way to unite not only the scattered human factions, but also convince other galactic powers that humanity's rebellion was not a passing threat, it was a new order that would shift the balance of power in the galaxy. But first, she needed to secure the most crucial ally of all, the Corians. Captain Marcus Talon's mission to Velozal, the Corian homeworld, had proven far more difficult than anticipated. The Corians were a shadowy species, with no true allegiance to any one government or faction. Their nomadic lifestyle had made them formidable traders, but their loyalty was always up for sale. Talon's team had navigated the political intrigue and web of backroom deals that defined the Corian way of life, finally securing an audience with the Corian Council. The Corians had watched the Terran rebellion with interest, but they were not easily impressed. Their people had survived for millennia without engaging in the wars of the galaxy. They had no interest in joining a conflict that didn't directly benefit them. However, Talon had a secret weapon, a treasure trove of ancient technologies seized from Wrath and Scythar forces during the past few months of fighting. The Quarians, with their insatiable thirst for knowledge, were intrigued by the possibility of new technology, especially technology that could be used to disrupt the dominance of the galaxy's established powers. After tense negotiations, a deal was struck. The Quarians would provide the Terran Confederation with vital intelligence on Wrath and Scythar movements, and in exchange, they would receive the technological spoils of the Terran rebellion. It wasn't a perfect alliance. There was always the threat that the Quarians would betray the Terrans once they had what they wanted, but for now, it was enough. With the Quarians now allied with humanity, Captain Voss returned to Pyrrhion 3, where the Terran forces were preparing for an inevitable clash with the Wrath. It was clear the Wrath were coming for them, and Voss knew that this battle would determine the fate of the rebellion. The Terrans would either crush the Wrath and claim their place among the stars, or they would be wiped out, their dreams of a galactic future extinguished. As the Wrath fleet approached Pyrrhion 3, the Terrans scrambled to fortify the planet's defenses. The Quarians had provided invaluable intelligence, allowing the Terrans to anticipate the Wrath's movements and set traps for their advancing forces. However, despite their best efforts, the Wrath fleet was overwhelming. Hundreds of warships, each more powerful than the last, closed in on the planet, their weapons charged and ready to strike. The battle began with a deafening roar, as the Terran fleet engaged the Wrath armada in the skies above Pyrrhion 3. The once peaceful planet was transformed into a battleground, as explosions lit up the atmosphere and the very ground shook with the force of orbital bombardments. The Terran forces fought fiercely, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. However, Captain Voss had a secret weapon, one that could turn the tide of the battle. Deep within the heart of the planet, hidden in the abandoned Wrath military base, was an ancient weapon, a weapon that could disable entire fleets with a single strike. Voss knew it was their last chance. She led a small team of elite soldiers to infiltrate the base and activate the weapon. As the battle raged on above, Voss and her team descended into the depths of the Wrath base. The mission was dangerous, but it was their only hope. They fought their way through hordes of Wrath soldiers, determined to reach the heart of the base before it was too late. With moments to spare, Voss activated the weapon. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the planet, disabling the Wrath fleet in one devastating blow. The remaining Wrath ships were left floating dead in space, their weapons useless, their command systems fried. The Terrans had won, this time. But as Voss stood on the battlefield, surveying the wreckage, she knew this victory was only temporary. The Wrath would regroup, and the other galactic powers would not tolerate humanity's rise for long. The war was far from over. The Terran victory at Pyrrhion 3 had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Wrath fleet was crippled, their dominance shattered, but their resolve was far from broken. Captain Alara Voss stood on the command deck of the Eclipse, her flagship, as the echoes of the battle reverberated in the silence that followed. The Confederation had won the battle, but the war was only just beginning. The Wrath, though defeated, were not the only threat humanity faced. The Scythar, once humiliated in their retreat from Pyrrhion 3, had regrouped and reformed their fleets. The Zenthri Combine, though they had not yet declared war, had been actively working to destabilize the human alliance. Their covert agents infiltrated the Terran colonies, sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust among the different factions. And the Harvax coalition, ever watching from the shadows, began to manipulate the unrest for their own benefit. Humanity, despite its newfound power, remained vulnerable. The Terran Confederation was a fragile construct, held together by Captain Voss's leadership and the shared ambition to survive. Yet, there were cracks, old rivalries and differing ideologies that threatened to tear it apart. Voss knew that unity would be their greatest strength in the coming conflict. The next phase of the war would require more than just military might. It would require the Terrans to become something more, something far beyond the sum of their parts. They would need to form a true, cohesive legion, a force that could stand against the established powers of the galaxy and shake their foundations to the core. To do this, Voss understood that she had to secure the loyalty of the human colonies, particularly those still on the fence. Some colonies had declared for the Confederation, but others remained neutral, unwilling to commit to a war they felt could not be won. Voss knew that without their support, the rebellion would falter. The Terrans needed a symbol, something more than a military victory, something that could rally every human colony to their cause. And so, the Terran Legion was born. The Legion was more than just an army. It was a unified force made up of soldiers, civilians, scientists, engineers, and diplomats, all working together with one goal: to ensure humanity's survival and dominance in the galaxy. Voss became the face of the Legion, its symbol of hope, resilience, and determination. The Legion would not just fight, it would inspire. It would bring the scattered human factions together under one banner and prove to the galaxy that humanity was no longer a fringe species, it was a force to be reckoned with. The first test of the legions might came sooner than expected. In the weeks following their victory at Pyrrhion III, the Scythar launched a surprise attack on the human-held planet of Khoran, a vital industrial world in the Terran Confederation. The Scythar's psychic warfare had been adapted to counter the Terran strategies, and they had developed new methods of disrupting the human will. Their forces moved swiftly, assaulting Khoran with a ferocity that caught the Terrans off guard. But this time, the Terrans were ready. Captain Voss, who had spent years studying the Scythar's tactics, had anticipated such an attack. She had deployed the Terran Legion's best soldiers, including newly trained psychic counterforces, to neutralize the Scythar's mental influence. It was a brutal fight, one that tested every soldier's will to survive. But the Terrans stood firm. The battle for Khoran was long and grueling. The Scythar's psychic warriors lashed out with waves of mental energy, attempting to break the human defenders. But the Terran Legion's psychic shields, developed with the help of the Khorians, held strong. For the first time, the Terrans fought back against the Scythar's psychic manipulation, using the very weapons the Scythar had developed to try and turn them into pawns. The battle culminated in a final push by the Terran forces, who, led by Captain Voss herself, stormed the Scythar command center on Khoran. With the psychic dampeners in place, the Terrans overpowered the Scythar's warriors and destroyed their command structure. The Scythar forces, now disorganized and leaderless, were routed. The victory on Khoran was not just a military triumph, it was a statement. The Terrans had faced the Scythar at their most powerful and had emerged victorious. The Terran Legion had proven itself as more than just a collection of colonies, it had become a symbol of humanity's resilience, ingenuity, and determination. The Confederation was no longer just a rebel alliance. It was the foundation of a new galactic power. But victory came at a cost. The Scythar, though defeated, would not let the loss go unpunished. Their surviving fleets retreated, but they vowed vengeance on humanity. The Zenthri Combine, ever calculating, began to shift their approach, sensing an opportunity to deal with the Terran threat once and for all. And the Nrath, their pride still wounded, began to regroup, preparing their next move. The Terran Legion had won a critical battle, but the war was far from over. The galaxy, once divided by ancient empires, was now a battleground for the future of humanity. Captain Voss and her legion stood at the forefront of this conflict, ready to fight not just for survival, but for the chance to shape the future of the stars. As the legion's ships prepared for the next campaign, Captain Voss addressed her people. "We have proven that humanity can stand on its own. But we are not done yet. The galaxy is vast, and we have only begun to show it what we are capable of. Together, we will make our mark on the stars, and we will claim our place among the galaxy's greatest powers." Her words echoed through the ranks of the Terran Legion. They were ready. The galaxy would soon learn the true cost of underestimating humanity. The Terran Legion's victory on Khoran was a turning point in the war. Humanity had fought with unmatched ferocity and ingenuity, proving their worth to the galaxy. However, the true test had yet to come. The Scythar, though retreating, were not defeated for good. The Nrath, bruised but not broken, were regrouping. And now, a more subtle and insidious force was beginning to make its move. The Zenthri Combine had long remained a neutral, shadowy power in the galaxy, more interested in manipulating events from behind the scenes than engaging in direct conflict. Their empire, if one could call it that, was built on espionage, diplomacy, and subtlety. Where others used brute force or overwhelming technology, the Zenthri excelled at the art of influence. They preferred to play their cards in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike when their enemies were weakest. For years, the Zenthri had watched humanity's rise with a mixture of amusement and disdain. At first, they considered the Terran rebellion a fleeting threat, something that would burn out in time. But now, after the Scythar defeat and the creation of the Terran Legion, the Zenthri saw something far more dangerous. Humanity was not only a challenge, they were a potential disruptor of the entire galactic order. The Zenthri were a race of tall, slender beings, their bodies covered in smooth, dark skin that shimmered in the light. Their faces were featureless, save for two luminous, violet eyes that seemed to see through everything. They communicated in complex gestures and pheromones, making them difficult to understand and predict. Their greatest weapon, however, was their mastery of perception. They could manipulate minds, alter memories, and weave webs of misinformation so dense that even the sharpest minds found it impossible to discern truth from lies. The Zenthri had been quietly infiltrating the human colonies, placing agents within key positions and subtly shifting allegiances. They had already begun to sow seeds of doubt among the human factions, exacerbating the old rivalries that had plagued the Confederation from the beginning. In the shadows, they whispered of betrayal and division, hoping to weaken humanity's resolve before the true war began. But Captain Voss had felt the creeping influence of the Zenthri long before it had fully manifested. She was no stranger to subterfuge and manipulation, and her instincts had always been sharp. She had known that a force like the Zenthri, though invisible to most, would eventually take notice of humanity's rise. Her only question was, why now? The answer came when a high-ranking member of the Confederation's council, one of her most trusted allies, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The death was initially ruled an accident, an unfortunate mishap during a routine mission. But Voss suspected otherwise. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a web of lies and deception that pointed directly to the Zenthri. They had struck first, and they had done so with ruthless precision. The Confederation's unity was under threat, and Voss knew that to save humanity's fragile hold on the galaxy, she had to act quickly. She couldn't let the Zenthri succeed in dividing them. But the problem was, the Zenthri were everywhere. They were in the highest levels of government, among the most respected military commanders, and within the colonies themselves. To root them out would require something drastic, something that could expose them for what they were without causing irreparable damage to the human cause. Captain Voss called for a council meeting, bringing together the leaders of the human colonies, the Corians, and other trusted allies. As the representatives assembled in the war room, Voss looked around at the faces of those who had fought so hard alongside her. She could see the unease in their eyes. They had won battles, but this war would require more than just strength, it would require cunning, strategy, and trust. "We are being manipulated," Voss said, her voice cold and steady. "The Zenthri are here, among us, pulling the strings from the shadows. They've already begun to destabilize our unity. But we can turn the tide." The room was silent as her words sank in. "We cannot afford to fight this war in the open as we did before," she continued. "If we want to take the fight to the Zenthri, we'll need to work in the shadows, too. We need spies, we need agents, and we need to expose their network. This will be the most dangerous operation we've undertaken." The Corians, who had seen their own empire unravel through covert action and manipulation, agreed immediately. They had the knowledge, the technology, and the personnel to infiltrate the Zenthri's web. It would be a delicate operation, requiring the utmost care. The Corians could not afford to make mistakes, or the Terran Confederation's fragile alliances would shatter beyond repair. But Voss had a deeper, more personal stake in this than anyone knew. The Zenthri had not just infiltrated the highest levels of the Confederation, they had infiltrated her inner circle. A trusted advisor, someone who had stood beside her through every battle, had been revealed to be a Zenthri agent. Voss had once considered this individual a friend. The betrayal was personal, and the weight of it was crushing. To make matters worse, the Zenthri had planted false information, convincing some factions within the Confederation that Voss was compromised, that she had been working with the Zenthri all along. The seeds of doubt had taken root, and her leadership was now under direct threat. As the war for the future of humanity raged on, Captain Voss found herself fighting not just on the battlefield, but in a war of shadows, a war where trust was as valuable as any weapon. She couldn't afford to falter. If she did, everything she had fought for would crumble. The Terran Legion, the Confederation, and the future of humanity hung in the balance. The Zenthri had made their move, and now it was time for the Terrans to strike back, this time, from the shadows. The galaxy had shifted, its ancient power structures rattled by the meteoric rise of humanity. The Terran Confederation, led by Captain Alara Voss, stood as a beacon of resistance against the established empires. But now, as the Terrans faced their most insidious threat, a war was being waged not just in the stars, but in the hearts and minds of every human soldier, every leader, and every ally. The Zenthri had made their move, and humanity's unity had never been more fragile. Captain Voss had learned the hard way that there were few things more dangerous than a betrayal from within. Her trusted advisor, who had been secretly working for the Zenthri, had sowed doubts in the hearts of the Confederation's leadership. Now, accusations flew, the foundations of their fragile alliance crumbling under the weight of suspicion. Voss had to act quickly to restore her people's faith in her and to expose the Zenthri's vast network of manipulation. The war for the future of humanity had entered its final phase, and it would be a war of truth, deception, and ruthless strategy. Voss knew that if the Zenthri were not stopped now, their subtle influence would soon tear the Confederation apart. The future of the galaxy rested on the outcome of this final gambit. Voss's first move was to secure the loyalty of the human colonies that were wavering in the face of the growing suspicion. She knew that the Zenthri's agents had infiltrated even the highest councils, planting disinformation to undermine her leadership. The only way to restore order was to expose the truth. And for that, she needed a masterstroke, a move that would strike at the heart of the Zenthri conspiracy. She turned to the Quarians, who had become invaluable allies throughout the war. Their intelligence network had proven to be the key to rooting out the Zenthri's operatives. With their help, Voss launched a series of covert operations, designed to infiltrate the Zenthri's web of influence and reveal the true extent of their manipulation. The Terran Legion's best spies and elite forces went deep undercover, infiltrating Zenthri strongholds and gathering irrefutable evidence. Weeks passed in secrecy. The tension was palpable. The stakes had never been higher. The Terran forces were scattered across the galaxy, with many still engaged in their battles against the Nrath and Skythar. But Voss knew that the key to victory lay in the delicate balance between military might and the power of truth. The breakthrough came when a covert Terran team uncovered a hidden Zenthri network buried within the capital of the Skythar Empire. The Zenthri had been manipulating the Skythar's leaders for months, fanning the flames of their desire for revenge against humanity. With the information they gathered, Voss had what she needed, a smoking gun that would expose the Zenthri's influence in multiple empires, including the Skythar and Nrath. With this newfound evidence, Voss called for an emergency summit of the human colonies, the Quarians, and their allies. She broadcast a message across the galaxy, calling for an alliance to unite against the true enemy of the galaxy, the Zenthri combine. The Zenthri had not only manipulated their enemies but had played every faction against each other, all for their own gain. As the summit began, Voss presented the evidence. Screens flashed with intercepted communications, hidden reports, and testimonies from defectors within the Zenthri network. The truth was undeniable. The Zenthri had been orchestrating chaos across the galaxy, using their abilities to manipulate perceptions and pit civilizations against one another. Their goal was to create an unstable galaxy, one in which the Zenthri could rise as the unseen power, controlling everything from the shadows. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the weight of the revelation sank in. The human colonies, once divided and unsure of their place in the galaxy, now saw the true enemy for what they were. The Zenthri, with their ability to control minds and manipulate the course of history, had been the architects of the galaxy's suffering. The response was swift. The Zenthri's web of spies and agents began to unravel as their carefully cultivated networks of influence fell apart. Every ally of the Terran Confederation, from the Quarians to the Skythar and Wrath, began to see the Zenthri for the parasites they were. A united front emerged, stronger than any force the galaxy had ever known. Captain Voss knew that this was the moment of truth. The Zenthri would not take their exposure lying down. They would fight back with every tool at their disposal: psychic warfare, subterfuge, and manipulation. The battle for the galaxy's future would be fought not just in space, but in the very minds of its people. The final showdown took place on the moon of Khoran, the same world where humanity had made its first significant stand. But this time, the stakes were higher. The Zenthri had initiated their last desperate bid to maintain control, a psychic strike designed to break the will of the unified Galactic Alliance. They sent waves of psychic energy, hoping to fracture the minds of the Terran Legion and their allies. But Voss, prepared for this moment, had a secret weapon. She had worked with the Quarians to develop a countermeasure, a device capable of neutralizing the Zenthri's psychic attacks. As the Zenthri's waves of manipulation bombarded the battlefield, the Terran forces activated the device. The psychic storm shattered, and the Zenthri's influence was broken. With their defenses shattered, the Zenthri forces were exposed, and the Alliance made their move. The Terran Legion, supported by their allies, launched a final assault on the Zenthri's hidden stronghold. The battle was fierce, but in the end, the Zenthri were overwhelmed. Their one secret empire crumbled, and their leaders were captured or killed. As the dust settled, Captain Voss stood victorious on the battlefield. The galaxy had been saved from the Zenthri's manipulation, and humanity had claimed its place among the stars. The Terran Confederation, now the backbone of a united galactic alliance, would guide the future of the galaxy, a future where humanity's strength, ingenuity, and unity would forever alter the course of history. The galaxy, once divided, now looked to humanity as its new leaders. Voss knew that the challenges were far from over. But for the first time, the stars truly belonged to the Terrans. And they would defend it, as they had always done, with blood, courage, and the unyielding will to survive. Humanity had claimed its place among the stars, and no one would ever forget it.